ActionSA policy discussions that are currently underway. ActionSA is preparing to go to our inaugural policy conference in September on the 12th to the 14th. It will happen here in Gauteng. And so these discussions are aimed at preparing and helping us put together potent material which will be discussed at that policy conference. And out of that policy conference, will we come up with solutions to fix South Africa? As you know, our slogan for the 2024 elections is "Let's fix South Africa." And in order to do that, in the spirit of the People's Dialogue, which is our origins, we've always engaged South Africans with the way in which we must go, because for a long time now, regular people, civil society, etc., has been largely left out of the formulations of our policies as a country, and also in the political process. And so for us, it's very important the role that civil society plays, academia plays, regular people in the street plays, in order to help us put together solutions that will respond to all of South Africa and not just segments of our society. So we thank you very much for joining us. My name is Lerato Ngobeni. I am the national spokesperson of ActionSA. I also do have my colleagues who are joining us this morning who will also give their inputs. But I welcome all of you academics and also experts in your field. In this particular roundtable, we are talking agriculture. And so, that's a very important topic. As you know, it encompasses food security as well. And our hope is that we will come out of this conversation with very potent outputs that you all will have given to all of us. So thank you once again. I have my colleague who is the head of policy also here on the line with us, Johan. So from time to time, Johan and I may collaborate with one another. There he is. He's waving at all of you. Johan works in our policy unit, and so he is really the master coordinator of this entire process. So thank you, Johan, and welcome. I will not name all of my colleagues one by one, but we will talk to each and every one of them as they come on the platform. The way this is going to work is, because we're online colleagues, we really need everybody to keep to time. We have allocated 10 minutes per speaker. If you do have a way of not using up all of the 10 minutes, please do that so that we can give speakers who may be much more elongated. We all don't speak the same, so we can give some of the time to them. And so we want to make sure that we really, really are strict on time. What I am going to do is, when your time is up, or is about to be up, let me say 2 minutes into your time, I will raise my hand as if I'm asking a question. So when you see that icon coming up, just know that I'm actually just indicating that your time to speak is up. Usually these sessions, when we have them in person, they are fairly informal. And so it does feel strange to do them this way this time around, but we're going to do our best. And we will have a very informal conversation, but if you have a projected presentation you would like us to project, please indicate that, and Johan will help toggle through the presentation as you speak. In the first instance, I'm going to start with the president of ActionSA, Mr. Herman Mashaba, to give us his remarks, and then I will just introduce the speakers as they come on. There's quite a lot of speakers today. And so I'm going to see, as the conversation happens, also together with the topics that you all have submitted, as to how it is that we are going to manage the program. So we will start with Mr. Mashaba, and then we'll end back with a representative of ActionSA. And so without much further ado, Mr. Herman Mashaba, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Lerato. Please allow me to really use this opportunity to thank everyone participating in this very important session, to have accepted the invitation to join us. And I think I just really want to make it clear that we've not invited you as ActionSA to support us or anything else, because we all really know yourself as experts. For us as politicians, our knowledge of the subject matter is very dangerous. It is for that reason that as a party, we always believe in formulating our party's policy positions. We bring experts in their various fields. This one in particular regarding agriculture, I think this one is very close to my heart, and I requested our team running this roundtable that are participating in it. And I'm glad that we have a full house. It would have been lovely to really have it in person, but I think really knowing very well how busy we are for most of the farmers, this is the time for them to really be at work. But however, you made the time to really join us this morning. So on behalf of ActionSA, please allow me to really convey our deepest gratitude. In terms of the agricultural sector, let me start with the economic contribution of this sector. In the first quarter of 2023, the agricultural sector accounted for just under 900,000 jobs, or 5.4% of all employment in South Africa. And as you are aware, as much as it's a significant number, we know the role that agriculture played in the past. That is why South Africa is sitting with such high unemployment. Obviously, with the right policy framework, this number can easily double within the first 10 years of having the right government in place. The sector has also accounted for approximately 10% of all export earnings in 2021. The industry is thus a vital part of South Africa's economy, particularly in rural areas. That's why we're sitting with a massive challenge today with what we call informal settlements, which are really squatter camps. So people are moving away from the rural areas because no employment opportunities any longer. Our agricultural sector is not supported by government, and therefore, obviously, job opportunities are shrinking, and people are coming into the cities, creating massive challenge. That's why agriculture for us as South Africa is important. Second item I'd like to address is land reform. We as ActionSA, we acknowledge the historic imbalances in land ownership and the ongoing efforts for land reform. But as a party, we emphasize the importance of striking a balance between redressing historical injustices and ensuring that farming remains productive and contributes positively to food security. I think, honestly, would, as a nation, be irresponsible if we see an example of what has really happened in Zimbabwe. We do not really have to redress, because one thing that I've learned in life, two wrongs cannot really make a right. And for me, ever since I got into politics, even before I went into politics, I used to be the chairman of the Free Market Foundation, working with Leon Law, and we engage the farming community quite extensively. By far, the majority of our farmers are aware of the political dynamics and the history of our country, and are prepared to really be part of our new dispensation. And we have our new constitution adopted in 1996 that actually adequately addresses this whole issue of land reform. We cannot address land reform in an irresponsible kind of fashion. Let us recognize what has happened and find a way through the constitutional framework to address this, but grow the sector, because it's critical for our country's future. Thirdly, I want to talk about the role of technology. We believe that technological innovation has a significant role to play in improving agricultural productivity, and that we should support farmers with access to such technology in order to improve South Africa's food security. I think there's just no way our industry, our agricultural industry can ever grow if we don't incorporate technology in it. Yes, we'd like to really employ as many people as possible, but we can only employ people if your business is productive. So we encourage our agricultural sector to embrace technology as part of the kind of business that they do. Next item is climate change and sustainability. We acknowledge that the agricultural community is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. With an El Nino climate cycle approaching, we recognize that we need to support our farmers in being resilient in the face of drought and other externalities. And I think something really very unfortunate, if I look at our country, the last 30 years of our new democratic dispensation, we've not really been taking care of South Africa as the water scarce as a country. And unfortunately, agriculture requires water. And I think it's something as a country we've not really been proactive in addressing. For us as ActionSA, it's something that we really want your input to assist us how to really address this obvious risk that we are facing as a nation. The next item is the importance of food security. We need to ensure that we do address the challenge of a growing population and the need to ensure that every South African has access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. We encourage collaboration between government, the private sector, and farmers to develop strategies to improve food production, storage, and distribution the systems. I think that is really very obvious that no ways as society, as human beings, we can survive without food. You know, one thing I always tell people as human beings or human species, we're lucky God has given us this beautiful weather to enjoy. But at the end of the day, our bodies requires food, and food comes from the industry, from the agricultural sector. The next item is education and training. It is important that we equip the next generation of farmers with the right skills to continue to feed our nation in an increasingly complex operating environment. We need to enhance the role of agricultural colleges, training programs, and extension services to ensure we have an empowered agricultural workforce. You know, I was quite broken or disturbed a few months ago. My wife and I watched one of the television programs in terms of how in the last 29 years of our democracy, we have compromised agricultural training colleges. In fact, it is crime. It's more than just ignorance. It's actually crime because we have to invest in these colleges so that we can produce the next level of farming, because farming is not the business for sissies. It's a job that requires obviously education, it requires experience, it requires passion, because it's a difficult industry. In terms of logistics and agricultural value chains, we acknowledge the logistical challenges farmers face with ever deteriorating infrastructure and believe that our government must massively expand investment into and maintenance of economic infrastructure. You know, the last few months I've been traveling quite extensively throughout the country. If I look at, obviously everyone is aware of the collapse of our rail network, and I cannot understand how any nation would expect the farmers or businesses to transport their goods to the market without provision of the infrastructure. But what is even more worrying for me are our provincial roads. Our provincial roads, the state of them. In fact, going to the Free State, I used to go to travel in the Free State, go to Lesotho at least once a month or every second month in the 80s. Our roads used to be world class. The other day I traveled after almost 25 years. Our roads, not just really potholes, even the trees are now coming into blocking the roads, provincial roads. And these are roads that are supposed to be used by farmers to transport their goods and services. So that's something that I believe that we need to really address as a nation if we are serious about food security and the protection of our farmers. In terms of diversification, we must allow our agricultural community to innovate and diversify the farming of high-value crops and livestock and identify opportunities for niche product development. We cannot obviously is because farming is a business as well. People are not just really doing it because it's something that they like to do. So innovation is critical, and to really be able to, if you are producing whatever product, the market keeps changing, and if you don't really adapt with the market as business, unfortunately, you will eventually die. So through education and training, that's where technology becomes very important. But at the same time, what we do, we ensure that our farmers are in contact with other developed nations, so that I think we can really share ideas in terms of the new product development. Lastly, I'd like to really address the question of rural safety. We also acknowledge the challenge our farmers and members of our rural communities face in terms of safety and security, and believe that more must be done to ensure effective protection and policing of our rural areas. Fellow South Africans, this whole issue of rural safety, and I'm not for 1 minute saying our rural safety is the only concern. We live in a country where 70 people are being murdered every single day in my country. Sometimes I actually feel embarrassed to be living in a country where we murder so many of our people, more especially now when it comes to the farming community, because they live in rural setups on their own. So you can imagine if the farmers are going to also abandon living in their respective farming communities, where will the food of this country come from? So as much as we need security for all South Africans, but I think a special effort has got to be made to ensure that our farmers are protected, because their working conditions would not really run farming in an industrial high density area. So you need to obviously live there with your family in secluded areas. But if the government is not prepared or does not provide the necessary protection to our farmers, then we can only really blame ourselves as society if one day we find ourselves in the same situation as Zimbabwe, which, as you are aware, Zimbabwe just 30 years ago used to be the breadbasket of Southern Africa. They used to produce more food than to really provide for the entire region. Today, we are seeing a disaster. We cannot afford to really have another Zimbabwe happen under our watch. So let's really ensure that we protect our farmers, so that our farmers can do what they know best, is to provide food to this nation. So thank you very much, colleagues, for your input. As I say, I'm not a farmer myself. My knowledge of farming is very dangerous, but I like food and I like good food. And I believe it's something that all South Africans deserve to have. So we hope that you can give us inputs in our policy formulation, so that we can ensure that we can work together as government, as civil society, as the farming community, to make sure that food security in this country is secured. Thank you very much. Back to you, Lerad.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Mashaba, for those opening remarks. Colleagues, I'm going to say that Johan Dreyer will be next, who represents the agricultural community. Johan will be followed by Elriza Theron. Is it Elriza Theron? I hope I'm saying it correctly, who represents the Advocacy and Communications portfolio at Croplife. And then I'll announce the next two as they follow. For those who are watching us on live stream, we are taking questions as the speakers go. I will collate all of those questions, which we will ask in the Q&A session at the end of all of the presentations. Let me check with Johan. Johan, do you have a presentation that must be flighted, or will you speak to us directly?
Now I will speak directly. I don't have much to say, so you can give nine of my 10 minutes away.
All right, take it away, Johan. Thank you very much.
Listening to Mr. Mashaba speaking, and I heard him in Vicksburg as well, I think we should I want to emphasize, I'm not an agricultural expert. I live on a farm, I live in the area, I've been involved in the political situation in my municipality. And I've watched and learned and seen things happen. We have a lot of stock theft around Vicksburg, Tokalaan. We're on the border with Lesotho. Furthermore, we have stock theft within our communities. But all this, I believe, should be addressed by fixing up the police force, by fixing up law enforcement. And then the other thing that should happen is we should find a way to give the people who are unemployed at the moment an opportunity to earn a living. Once we do that, the theft will start taking care of itself, and we will be able to move on. Furthermore, everything Mr. Mashaba mentioned in his opening remarks, all that counts. The roads, the rail links. We have an extremely resilient community, farming community, but they're all individuals, so they don't want to be told what to do, but they tend to work together when necessary. Furthermore, I don't think I have much to say. Might add something at a later stage, but at the moment, I'll stand back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johan. Yes, you definitely, the next speaker owes you a great debt because you literally have given them all of 8 minutes. And so, Elriza, you have a lot of time on your hands, but I hope you won't overindulge. Elriza Theron represents Croplife for the Advocacy and Communications Department. Elriza, do you have a presentation?
Thank you, Lerato. Yes, I do. It's not mission critical to share it, but it might be nice to see the words while I talk. So can I use the share screen option?
Absolutely. Does our Johan Greyling, do you have Elriza's presentation, or can we allow
you can share the screen, Elriza? That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
We can indeed.
Okay, great. Is it in presentation mode?
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Okay,
yes,
fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for this wonderful opportunity. I am also going to try and keep it as brief as possible. I think first to start off with is who we are as Croplife South Africa. So also, yeah, I'm not an agricultural specialist, and I can really only speak on the plant side of things because, as Mr. Mashaba also said, my knowledge of livestock is dangerous. So I'm going to keep to the crops. But Croplife South Africa, we're a non-profit industry association. We represent responsible manufacturers, suppliers, and distributors of sustainable crop protection solutions, but that also includes public health and plant biotechnology. People often tend to forget that when you look at issues like pesticides or protection solutions, it includes vector control, such as malaria. So that's where we represent them. So that's why public health is included here as well. So we also represent the consumer sectors because many of our members, they, of course, if you go into any builder's warehouse, all the crop protection solutions or pesticides, as we call them, they on the shelves there for home solutions as well. So our members are voluntary members, and our main aim is to ensure that we have food security in a sustainable manner in South Africa, with particularly in the crop side of things. So I'm just going to look at some of the challenges our industry is facing that we're seeing as problems that need some attention. First, I'm going to start off on farm level. I'll try and keep it quick. And then I'm just going to look at some of the broader policy issues when it goes internationally and how that might affect us. But I'm not going to go into too much detail. It'll be quick because I think it is pretty self-explanatory. Right. Also, yes, as I mentioned, our mission is to enable our members to be the providers of environmentally compatible solutions as well. We do believe in doing the right thing. That's one of our main aims as the industry. So without further ado, I'm going to go to the next slide. So pesticides, for those who don't know, are regulated in South Africa primarily by Act number 36 of 1947 and SANS 10206. The key points of this act, even though it is, it sounds like it's very old, and 1947 sounds like a very long time ago, it's a very robust act, and there have been some amendments made, I think 6 amendments made, so it's quite robust, and it still serves its purpose. So looking at the date of that shouldn't be a concern. Some of the key points we need to consider within this act is that all pesticides must be registered with the Registrar of Act 36. A pesticide may not be used for any purposes other than what it was registered for. This is something that gets overlooked quite a bit. And similar to that, I'll get to that now, is also pesticides may not actually be used for any other purpose other than that appears on the label for what it was registered for. Pesticides that are not labeled or not in their original containers may not be in anyone's possession. Now, I don't know if anyone has noticed on social media or various other platforms, or even in some of the markets, that you will often find people advertising these miracle remedies for cockroaches and rats, and you name them. All of those are illegal. And the reason for that is pretty clear. It is we have zero control over the efficacy, what's in that bottle, and there's no recourse should the product not do it. It's an immense risk to the health of humans, pets, anyone basically. So that for us is quite a big issue. And the other thing that's not always that well known is that you may not use any pesticide contrary to its label. So this includes which pest you are using it for, as well as which crop you are using it for, including how you apply it. So for instance, if the solution is not registered for aerial application, then you may not apply it via aerial application. And people tend to overlook that. And I think the reason we're bringing this up is that it boils down to training. It boils down to training on farm level. And what we need to get this message down to all the role players so that we can ensure the safety of our people. Other challenges are the safe and storage and transport of pesticides. All of these are they all have legislations attached to them, but these aren't being followed necessarily. So it all boils down to responsible use. The wearing of correct PPE, personal protective equipment or clothing, the management of empty pesticide containers. Now, many may not know, the National Environmental Management Waste Act of 2008 now have regulations regarding extended producer responsibility, meaning any manufacturer or supplier of waste products have a duty to ensure that those products get back into, that there's a mechanism for those products or containers to get back into the circular economy. This is a big thing for us when it comes to empty pesticide containers, especially the plastic ones that can be recycled. Now, we have a very good program in order to vet the role players or some service providers that can collect these pesticide containers on the farm and then also recycle them. But unfortunately, we still see a lot of instances where shockingly, people are still using these containers for other purposes, such as carrying water, which I don't need to tell you why that is a massive risk. Or they bury or burn them on the farms, which is illegal. So this is a big issue for us in order to ensure that everybody, it's not just that everybody, it's a training issue. We need to ensure that everybody on the farm knows what they need to do. And then also incorporating integrated pest management principles. These are just good agricultural practices that we're trying to promote. So only using plant protection solutions when it's absolutely necessary. That means including preventative and curative measures, but you don't just spray. You need to monitor, you need to scout, you need to only apply any form of product when it's really absolutely necessary and when your economic thresholds are going to be have a challenge. So this also means that you need to use all the available tools. So it's not just a reliance on synthetic or chemical products, but that you use your cultural, mechanical, biological, and chemical methods of control as well when it comes to pest control. And then, of course, incorporating good resistance management practices. For plant biotech, that means planting of refuge areas and crop protection on the chemical side of things, ensuring you rotate the different mode of action. And the reason is so that these tools can remain in our toolbox for longer, because once a pest has developed resistance against any of these tools, you'll see now why that is going to be a big problem for us. So in terms of this, I was very happy to hear Mr. Mashaba talking about the training aspect of agriculture that we really need to promote. But it's not just the formal training. We have to go onto the farms and ensure that all the role players know exactly which aspect of responsible use are mission critical. And I don't think a lot of people know that many of their actions that they are performing on farm is actually illegal. So those are some of the issues that we particularly try to pay attention to and ensure that responsible use of our members' products are at the forefront of all our conversations first. Now, moving on into the grander scheme of things, when we look at some of the threats to our, not just our industry, actually agriculture as a whole, and you'll see why I say that now. I'm just going to keep it short and only look, there's a lot of details underneath all these points that we can go into, but that's quite beyond the scope of this engagement session, I think. But we are sitting with a situation where we are losing products faster than they're being replaced. A lot of it has to do with pressures from the EU, and a lot of the EU stances are not necessarily based on science. They follow a hazard approach instead of a risk approach. And just to give some context within this, if you look at the difference, it would be a bottle of bleach in its container is a hazard, but it only becomes a risk if you decide to drink it, right? So the similar can be said for a car. The amount of traffic accidents or vehicle accidents we have on the roads these days, a car in itself is a hazard, but it only becomes a risk if you don't stick to the rules of the road, and they are there for a purpose and a reason, wearing your safety belt, the speed limits. And this is similar when it comes to crop protection solutions. These rules, they exist for a reason, and the products can be applied very safely if the rules are followed. So this is something in context that we need to take cognizance of, because our situation, our reality in South Africa, our agricultural reality is different to that of the EU or any other country for that matter. We might have similarities, but our reality is not the same as theirs. We have different crop pest matrices. They don't need some of the products. They don't deal with things such as fall armyworm or these massive locust swarms that we have seen. So we can't just blindly follow what other people try to implement, because the fact is they have other strategies that they are following. So when we look specifically at, for instance, the EU Green Deal, and this is just one of the examples, and this really could pose a threat to our food security in South Africa, because what they're trying to impose is things like mirror clauses or export bans of certain products, that it's not necessarily always that it might be a major hazard. It's maybe just not necessary there. And so they enforce these rules then onto third countries. Our ability to then remain competitive is at risk. We'll see rising input costs if it costs more to get these products into the country or formulate them ourselves. And this is, for instance, in the grain industry. I'm not an economist, but I've heard the example given. If we just look at yellow maize, for instance, and this is an extreme example, of course, but if our farmers are not able to farm competitively with yellow maize anymore, and they decide to all down tools, it will cost us $44 billion more to import that same amount of maize that we can produce at present from the US. Now that's significant, and you can imagine what that's going to do to our food affordability, and that's just yellow maize, right? So these are some of the threats to the industry that we really need to pay attention to, because if our farmers can't farm affordably anymore because of these rising input costs, because of policies that have been implemented on us that are not based on science necessarily, it will of course affect job security. We will see fewer people. Farming will not be profitable anymore. In addition, I've already spoken about the ability to apply good resistance management practices, because there aren't enough products with different mode of actions and phytosanitary implications, as we've seen with the citrus black spot now as well. So these are just some of the issues that we might be looking at. And lastly, the reason why this is a problem for us is the regulatory environment in South Africa. At present, we have a backlog of getting new products into South Africa. We are working with government to try and fix that, but it is a problem. So we need to just ensure that the regulatory environment in South Africa is enabling to bring these new tools into the country faster, and that includes plant biotechnology. And with that, I will leave it. And if anyone has any questions, they are more than welcome to reach out to me on the email address provided. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elriza. I was about to say, you know what, I'm going to give you another 5-10 minutes because you are the only woman on the panel besides myself. So I was going to just let you go on. No, thank you. Thank you very much for that. The next two speakers, so the questions will be asked at the end. I am collecting some that I'm receiving online. The next speakers we will have is Mr. Dirk Hanekom from, is the CEO of Agri All Africa, and Mr. Dirk Hanekom will be followed by Mr. Corné Vermaak, who's the Vice President of AgriGauteng. Dirk Hanekom? Do you have a presentation for us, sir, or will you present for yourself? Is Mr. Hanekom on? Johan, assistance?
Mr. Hanekom is online. Not sure whether he's on mute.
Okay. Well, let's go on then. Mr. Corné Vermaak, are you ready?
I don't see Mr. Vermaak on our guest list.
Yeah, I see Dirk is there, but okay, let's move on. The next person I was going to ask is Henri Minnaar, who represents AgriMentor.
Yeah.
Henri Minnaar, are you on?
Yes, Lorato, it's me. My camera is on. You can see me. Good day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
We can hear you very clearly. Are you just going to speak off the cuff, or do you have a presentation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have been not been able to prepare anything, but I've got a few remarks. Firstly, I want to say I 100% agree with the sentiments that Mr. Herman Mashaba expressed. These are the things that I'm talking. Maybe I could just say something about myself. I'm an agriculture economist. I've been for 10 years now, independent consultant. I'm currently working for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is a federal government agency based in Washington. And I'm working specifically in Lesotho. I just heard our dear farmer that just spoke from, I think he said he's from Vicksburg. And I work with a lot of, Johan, I work with a lot of farmers in the Free State to try and see, you know, how we can improve the farming situation and create jobs in Lesotho. I also work in Zambia. And I've done work for the Millennium Challenge Corporation also in Malawi. And then I'm currently busy with a project with an engineering firm that we work on the development of Volta Lake region in Ghana. And then I do all kinds of other work. I have been involved. I have a few remarks. We're mostly working in the rest of Africa, outside South Africa, but I do work very closely with the agribusinesses here in South Africa. I think one of the biggest challenges in Africa and also in South Africa is the distrust between government and the private sector. And I think the problem is that government perceives private sector as the enemy. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues that has been a leader in the agribusiness environment told me about a story. It was one evening at the function, and there were two South Africans talking to one another, and one gentleman moved from government service in the agriculture sector to private sector. And his friend that was still in government sector mentioned to him, he said, "Oh, I see you have joined the enemy." So just because he was working in private sector. And I think that is a huge issue. And it's not only in South Africa that we've got the distrust between government and private sector. And it's also true in the rest of Africa. And the thing is, just because our private sector is so well developed here in South Africa, I think we need to take hands more closely and try and work and collaborate. But if you perceive private sector as an enemy, there's something definitely wrong with the policymakers and these people. So I think we need to create a understanding that we're one nation, and that if we divide it upon ourselves, we will destroy ourselves. So we need to collaborate, and I think government must be open for policy dialogue, and you know, there are some. And it is being done on various levels, but I think, yeah, huge issue is with distrust between government and private sector. And also, they don't speak the same languages. And I've been involved in platforms that we created in South Africa and also in Southern Africa to get government and private sector to talk to one another on agriculture and agriculture development issues. Then I think government, you know, the problem is with government is that they intervene and they bring about policies that are so limiting that the private sector struggles to get ahead and just do business and get the business going. And I'm thinking of, and we need to address these things. It doesn't help us just talk about it, but we need to do something about it. But the Black economic empowerment is a very needed type of policy, but it's sometimes so limiting. If you just look at the new water regulations that Department of Water and Sanitation wants to bring about, that people need to show with BE points if they want to qualify for new water quotas. I mean, these things, there are so many problems already in the agriculture sector and at the farming level. Why make it more difficult for people just to produce food? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do empowerment of our disenfranchised communities, but I think we need to be very careful how we go about that. And the main role of government should actually be to create a conducive policy environment for private sector to flourish. I think that is the main thing. But if we've got all these intervention policies and regulations, it's going to become very, very difficult. Then I want to say a few things. Our dear colleague from Croplife, Elriza's made some very good points there on trade policy issues, like the black spot and the false conflict market at the moment. So trade policy for agriculture sector is huge. I mean, the whole thing that is currently happening with President Ramaphosa that's traveling, that is obviously siding with the Russian counterparts, that's only buying about 1% of our agriculture exports, while the EU and North America are buying so much more. You know, I think trade policy are being impacted by macro policies and macroeconomic policies. And we need to be very, very careful about how we go about that. But I hear what Elriza is saying about the limiting the huge costs that the EU regulations has upon do have on our agriculture sector. And we have been struggling, and I've been also doing some work with the EU on this. But I think there's huge opportunities, and we need to create a positive policy environment in terms of international trade. I just want to mention one thing quickly. I think there's huge opportunities in Southern Africa and the rest of the African continent for our exports of food and food products and other agriculture produce. And I think actually South Africa has done very, very well in this regard. I used to work for the African Development Bank, and I was managing projects in Ghana and Nigeria. And I met so many South Africans in 2005, 6, and 7 in Ghana and places like that. It was just amazing what all the kinds of things that were happening there. And I think the supermarkets also helped South African produce to get into the sub-Saharan Africa. So that's in terms of trade. And then I just quickly want to mention, I was fortunate to be part of first a one-man team and then also a two-man team that wrote, or two-person team, I'm sorry, that we wrote agriculture policy for smallholder farmers in 2016 and 17, because the problem was for smallholder farmers today is a huge problem with access to finance. And the problem is just that policies were not implemented the way we proposed. And at the moment, I just want to say also the land bank is a huge issue at the moment. And I think it's very important that we have an agriculture development bank. The one other thing I just want to mention, I used to work with the Development Bank of Southern Africa in the late 80s and early 90s. And we had a more project approach. It's similar to what the World Bank is doing and what's similar to what the African Development Bank, where I worked for 5 years, what they were implementing. And I think the land bank is just not the right place to do a project approach. They don't have the facilities, they don't function, they're a commercial agriculture bank, and they're not really a development bank. And I would strongly advise that we in future consider something, again, that's got a developmental approach, that's got a project approach, like what the DBSA used to have. They had a very strong agriculture division at one stage. But anyway, I do appreciate your time. I'm not sure, Lorato, how long I spoke, but maybe we can discuss some more of the questions. But these are my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You spoke for just about 8 minutes, and that's fine because the next speaker then has some of your outstanding time that you have not spent. So thank you very much for that. Is Dirk back? Dirk, I can see you on the system. I'm just not sure if you can hear us at all.
Dirk,
yes, I'm back. I apologize. There was a palm tree that unfortunately crashed down to the ground at my garden. So I ran out to go and investigate. It's lying halfway in my swimming pool. And they're cutting it up now. One of the results of too many ants, which can part is also agricultural problem. I'm back now. So
Dirk, I'm so sorry. It seems that President Mashaba may have jinxed you there because he spoke about trees falling. So Dr. Mashaba, I guess you have some retributions there to deal with. Thank you, Dirk. Do you have a presentation? Are you going to just speak off the cuff, or do you need us to?
I'm also going to make a contribution in terms of what I've heard. I was asked by Theo Jager to stand in. We're the two founder members of Agri All Africa, and let me just put my video on.
Yeah, fantastic.
And if it's okay, I will make a few comments. And the idea here is not to sound clever. It's actually what I'm hearing is very good contributions. From my side, I will comment just by first saying who I'm representing. It's basically SAI, the Southern African Agricultural Initiative, which is a family farmer organization. And by the way, it's an extremely important policy issue. I think it's investing in family as building blocks, makes the rural areas safer. It also brings agricultural education to the fore, and we need the youth in farming. Primary production has become an issue. I think the average age, Benny van Zyl and Henri will look at to correct me. Maybe I think it's now about 63 years. So if we don't have farmers left in the next generation, you leave it all to mega farmers, and then we have the desolation and the destruction of the rural areas because big farms take over and everybody starts moving more and more to the city. So the SAI is an important factor, I think, in organized agriculture at the moment. And then Agri All Africa was the African Committee of Agri-SA, which in 2015 went independent. And we're currently working in 45 African countries with more than 4,500 South African and Namibian and Zimbabwean farmers. We have completed 7 national policy documents for 7 different countries in Africa and also in the Far East. So in the job that we're doing, we evaluate, obviously coming from a background from policy advocacy, we link basically economic value chains. And I think the important thing is in a policy document is to have a very, very clear vision. A vision of which we have adopted, is to commercialize agricultural value chains. Now, that's a mouthful, but if you write a policy document, you can start either like a upturned, what's a tractor in English?
Funnel.
A funnel. Thank you so much. So you can, when you start to look at from a strategic point of view, it's very important. The vision forms the platform of which everything else hangs on downwards, and so that all the policies and regulation to follow must support this vision. So when we think value chain, then you will understand that the interdisciplinary nature of agriculture is extremely important to take cognizance of. All economic disciplines zigzag through the economic or through the agricultural sphere, and we must make in our policies, I think we must make ample room for that to see. And just by means of example, at the moment, the biggest job opportunities we have in Africa is the social corporate responsibility side. When mining is starting up, there's food security involved there. And when you're doing that, obviously infrastructure, energy, water, markets, inputs in the agricultural value chain comes along, education, all of those things. So it's really a catalyst for a lot of other things to either start it up with or make sure that in the other activities where there's food security involved, that the farming environment is being utilized in the right way. And saying that, point 3, it's extremely important to when you engage in farming, whether you're a smallholder or a bigger farmer, but we can't be in the business of survival farming. That's a poverty trap. So you need to commercialize what you're doing. It's extremely important. That means giving land out to people that's just sitting there doesn't bring us a jockey that will put value onto the land. Land in itself is available in abundance, even in South Africa and in Africa, but for centuries been lying idle. It is the jockey that makes the difference. And if you do that, it's extremely important that you do it well. That means business principles, the commercialization, and the project environment dictate whether you're going to qualify for the funding that you need. If you fund yourself or you go to funding institutions and you don't do the basics right, you're going nowhere. And then the next point that I would like to make is maybe an issue that politicians will like, but it's really, I don't say tongue in the cheek. I'm extremely serious about this point. And you will see that farmers tend to be leading figures, giving guidance wherever they are to communities where strong farming or commercial farming is dying. You can go and look at our deep rural towns and so on. The quality of third level of government actually disintegrate. The roads goes, the lights go, the municipal system goes, the schools run dry, and your school boards and your churches run dry, and it's because there's no quality leadership. So the role modeling and the norms and the value that's attached to the name of a farmer is something that we must treasure. And in our policy environment, we must make ample room for this, because the education and building up a nation that believes in the integrity of the farmer, where we're going, means that we have to restore the farmer in a position of honor. The farmers themselves obviously must bring their part as well, but I would like to see a very strong policy statement on the job. I think it's a God-given job, like other jobs as well, but that's extremely important. Maybe the last point that I would like to make is that, and Herman Mashaba said that, and in fact all of you addressed it, is the question of innovation and technology. We live in a different day and age, and if you're not on the forefront of that technological wave, you're staying behind, and you will not become competitive. A farmer today, whatever level you're farming on, you farm against competition. And if you're not on top of it, you will not make a success of your farming business. So to use the latest technology and what's available on phones to make sure your accountancy and financial management is up to par, your education and access to what's available in the world out there makes you competitive. And we must not only think that food security has to do with food. Food, in the end, farming has to do using the agricultural environment to create wealth. If you sit in the Sahara Desert, or you sit in Northern Africa where you've got gas and oil and so on, you buy the food that you need, but you use your resources to create the food security. In South Africa, we've got only 4.5% of Southern Africa's arable land, but we still produce 72% of all the fresh produce. So where lies the secret? It is it's focused on the human quality, access to finance, and quality knowledge, and using the technology. So it's I know it's a mouthful. Maybe the last point that I would like to say is when we're looking at and this has been extremely neglected in the last decade. Inter-Africa trade forms a massive part of South Africa's agricultural potential in Africa. Our border post, our regulations at border post, and laws that we've made, I think many of you made the point, is so restrictive. Example, what I'd like to mention, the Congo, the biggest pedestrian border post in Africa, the Kazumbaleza border post between Lubumbashi and Shingola, or Chile-Lebomwe. 3 months after President Sekeri and President Hichilema decided it must become a one-stop shop, one border post, obviously because of the copper trucks, but a lot of other reasons it's there. In 22 years, we could not get Rosano Garcia and Kumati Poort to unify as a single border post. It's because syndicate work and criminal activities dictate the economy of that area, and the bigger part of the economy stay behind. We have to have very strict policy stances about these kind of things. Just a few ideas. I would like to comment later on more, and I enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Wow, yeah, okay. You definitely gave me a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much, Dirk. I see the questions are coming in hard and fast. I hope that all of the panelists are ready for them, because those watching online are definitely, I think, being enthused by this conversation. For Johan Grieger, I hope that we are able to share the presentation. I have seen requests for some of the presentations that have been flighted to be made available, so we'll be doing that with your permission. Is Corné now available? Thank you very much, Dirk. We really appreciate your inputs. Is Corné online? Okay, no Corné. I think that we've said a lot now. I just wanted all the representatives of the different organizations to come on, but now I think we should go to academia. Oh, there's your stopwatch, Dirk. You made it in time. Can we have Jan Greyling from the, he's a researcher at Stellenbosch University, AgriFood Technology. Jan, are you on? There you are. Fantastic.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, let me share it quickly.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't have one. Where you do.
Okay.
But yeah. Thanks very much. Take it away. 10 minutes is yours.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. So everybody can see my screen, I assume.
We definitely can.
Okay, so I'm going to speak to 3 points, trying to be brief. Just quickly who I am, and then what should our primary goal be and why, and then what should the 5 key agricultural policy focus areas be. So I'm a farmer pretending to be an academic. I have a PhD from Stellenbosch University. I have a family farming background. I've spent several months in the Netherlands and the USA, farms all over the world. My research focus is on long-term agricultural productivity, policy, technology, and climate. And then I'm also involved in several projects in agri-food and natural resource data science. I've worked as a farm worker in the US, agricultural consultant through Africa, academic at Stellenbosch University, had a stint at the Agri-Food Technology Investment Company, and I'm back at Stellenbosch. I'm pragmatic, but I'm not a policy expert, so please do bear that in mind. Okay, so I think everything that we discuss with respect to policy, our primary objective should be we must grow the economy, and our secondary objective should be we must grow the economy, and our third objective should be we should grow the economy. Why do I say that? You know, I checked yesterday, our economic growth rate is 0.4%. If you look at our population growth rate, that's 1%. So in simple terms, the cake is growing at a slower rate than the number of people cutting the cake. Then if you look at how we are cutting the cake, you know, our expected wage growth, a survey by the BER, is 5% for this year. Our inflation rate is 6.3%. So in real terms, wage earners are becoming poorer. Then at the same time, our prime lending rate is 11.75%. So people who are earning income from capital is earning, you know, 4-5% above inflation. So in simple terms, you know, the cake is becoming cut in smaller pieces, and then also the slices are becoming more unequal. So everything that I'll say today actually speaks to growing the agricultural economy. And at the same time, everything that I say is also relevant to both small scale and large scale farmers. The first point that I want to make is that of infrastructure and trade. So a lot of people, when talking about the agricultural sector, herald it as a success story in the sense that we are a net exporter of agricultural products. And that is true. So we export more than we import in value terms. But what people often miss is if we look just one level deeper to see, you know, what do we import and what do we export, it's a completely different story. So the items in orange there are the items being imported, and the ones in green are the ones being exported.
Jan, we have lost you there for a second. Johan, might you be aware of the streaming challenge?
I think it seems like everything else is working, so it might just be on Jan's side that we're having an issue.
Okay, let's give him a moment to recover. He may be load shedding. I see that he.
We have just, yeah, he's just dropped off. So
yeah, he just dropped off. Colleagues, may I ask that we just give Jan a minute or two, and that may also give you a leg stretch for those who need it. When the time comes in, I will allow him back in. But if we can give him, 2 minutes or so. Thanks, everybody. We're doing well on time, so there we go.
And he's back.
Did you have load shedding?
Jan, you're just on mute still?
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I'm restarting everything here. Okay, so you can see my screen.
We definitely can now.
Okay, cool. So I was just saying that looking one level deeper, everything that we import are primary food items. And then if we look at everything that we export, you know, it's citrus, maize is a success story, and that speaks to regional trade to a large extent, but not exclusively so. Grapes, apples, wine, sugar, fruit and vegetable juices, and so forth. So if you want to boil this down, we are affording all of our primary food items by exporting high value items. So we are not food self-sufficient, and everything that we do should be focused on how do we improve our road infrastructure, our ports, our rail, and then also with respect to trade policy, how do we grow these exports? And just take the Cape Town Harbour as an example. You know, we're under capacity. There's simply not enough cranes. There was money allocated to cranes a couple of years ago, but then the money got captured. and now there's a bottleneck at the port, and fruit and stuff are spoiling. The other thing that one has to note with respect to this is most of these items are labor intensive. Okay, so we're actually exporting these labor intensive items, and we're importing these primary food items with them. So that's crucial. The second one that I want to talk to, that should be a focus area, is that of labor. Now, if you look at labor and agriculture and mining, then agriculture employs 2 workers for every unit of value added to the economy, versus mining, it's 1-to-1. So if we want to create jobs and stimulate the economy, we have to do it through agriculture. Now, traditionally, agriculture was perfectly positioned to provide employment. I used to have unskilled labor there. I've got low skill there now, but it's not the case anymore. Given wages, farm workers are becoming highly skilled and specialized. You know, in a world where we have such high unemployment, the wages are such that you have to do all kinds of aptitude tests and so forth to make sure that you find the best possible workers. But all is not lost. We need to increase the production of high value crops, and these are typically more labor intensive. And it's fairly easy to do. We've got spare capacity in terms of water. If you go from extensive livestock farming, you put up a pivot and you start growing export nuts, for example, then automatically the labor intensity of that piece of land has increased substantially. Transport has been raised a lot of times. And then also trade. You know, South America is one of our main competitors in terms of trade. Our farmers are still outcompeting them, even though their trade policy is much more conducive. They have far more trade agreements with the rest of the world than us. Then we have to make it easier to hire and fire workers. Herman has spoken about that in the past, so we're not going to go into that. We need to revisit minimum wages. We need to incentivize farmers to employ younger workers, given that it's getting a higher skilled industry. And then also, this is a long one, but I feel quite strongly about a scheme through which we can actually provide housing for farm workers off farm. Then I often ask students, what is a farmer? And I always say that a farmer is a professional risk manager, okay, because they willingly expose themselves to market, climate, price, political, security, so many risks. If you look at US agricultural policy, it's by far focused on addressing risk in farming. Yeah. Crop insurance costs are becoming prohibitively expensive. In a lot of instances, farmers cannot even insure their crops anymore. Not to talk about drought relief. And as stated by Mr. Mashaba, you know, climate change and the resulting extreme weather events, this will just become a bigger issue. Then in terms of credit and risk, those two are so closely linked that you cannot separate the two. You cannot get credit without managing risk. The land bank, as said by Mr. Minnaar, you know, it has a history of dating back to 1912. And the initial objective of the bank was to provide farmers with long-term loans that commercial banks could not offer. Later, it's expanded to production loans. You know, the bank is mismanaged. It does not have a development mandate anymore. So that's a critical item that we need to look into. Biosecurity, and let's just define it because it's often overlooked. It's a strategies implemented to prevent the introduction, spread, and impact of pests, diseases, and invasive species. Foot and mouth disease was in the headlines a while back. You know, not only do farmers lose the ability to export their livestock, but they also face culling of the animals. In the past, we had very good controls in terms of regulated and unregulated areas. That's not being managed, not to talk even about avian flu and the impact on the poultry industry, on the ostrich industry, and also it needs to protect consumers, and food security. And then the last item here, we cannot talk about biosecurity if we don't talk about honest to poor. So honest to poor, unfortunately, is also mismanaged, and farmers cannot get access to the critical vaccines that they need. So private sector is stepping in, but it will still be a while. And it's one of those places where private sector simply cannot take the full burden. Most farmers, and this is the last one, transformation. So most farmers ascribe to the goal of creating vibrant and inclusive rural communities. But I believe that to date, land reform and other transformation objectives has failed. I don't understand why can't we give beneficiaries title to the land. And there's so many instances of where this is going wrong. You cannot farm if you don't have land as a security. You cannot farm if you have to ask the government for anything that happens on your farm. Then there's so much land. I tried to find the exact statistic here, but I couldn't find it, where land has been purchased by the state, but has not been used for land reform. That's quite a low-hanging fruit. Then restitution creates a lot of uncertainty with respect to investment, and it's something that can be handled and should be handled. So if you look at the statistics, most people who do have a successful restitution claim opt for the money. So it's fairly easy to address that. And then the last one, so friends of mine work in agricultural banking. They've looked at various empowerment transactions. And the long and the short is that you have willing and able parties, both those who are existing farmers and people that want to be empowered or want to be part of this project. But if they cannot contribute something to the transaction simply cannot work. So you can't get money for nothing. Now, an easy win is to give beneficiaries water rights so that they can contribute that to the transaction, or loans and so forth. And then, we all know that, but to date, empowerment has only empowered a select few. So yeah, I just saw this article the other day, more than 25 years, Zabalala actually died without having title to his land. And then lastly, the others that I also wanted to raise, so rural safety, stock theft, research. The Agricultural Research Council is in a sorry state. Education, Herman spoke about that as well, terrible. And then mining has not been raised in the sense that I know so many instances where miners just have a complete disregard for agriculture and gain access to prospecting and mining rights in ways that I think is not above board. And in the end, they are actually destroying livelihoods. And the last one that I did forget is actually the topic of load shedding and electricity. So agriculture is energy intensive, and that obviously impacts on us as well. Okay, so sorry for that. It's quite brief, but back to you.
Thanks very much, Jan. I did was wanting for you to address the load shedding issue. We all know that that is affecting industries across the land, irrespective of which industry that is, and definitely we know of chicken farmers, for example, who are really under the buckle as a result of load shedding. I do want you to please have a look at, I've sent you a direct message in the chat function. Please have a look at that because that does concern your timing for this presentation. So, but thank you very much for your inputs thus far. I'm not seeing, who had I called? Corné Vermaak. I'm not seeing him. So as a result of that, I do know that there's Benny van Zyl. Benny, I see you on the line. I would like for you to present next. Are you ready to do so?
Yes, I am.
Okay, fantastic. Do you have a presentation or will you also speak off the cuff?
No, I just speak from myself. I will be very short. Sorry, we have some people think that they can take our electricity cables here during the night, so we have a huge electricity problem here. But should I start my video? I hope my
yes.
Let's see if this happens. Okay.
No, we're happy with
fine.
your video if you can, so that people can see you. But for the rest of your presentation, just so that you're able to stream correctly, it's okay if you need to switch it off. We're happy with that.
My battery is almost be quick and from my side, I just want to thank for a very sound proposal from his side. The way he put it on the table is that the last word is always been said by the market principles, if you like it or not. And that means that sustainability and profitability form the foundation of an effective agricultural sector. And the protection, promotion, and strengthening.
Benny? Sorry, Benny?
Should be the
Benny?
core of agricultural policy. With that, yes, put down my video.
Let me ask you to switch off your video so your stream
I've
can be.
done that.
Thank you.
I've done that. Okay. So that is very important to make sure that you stick to the right principles if you want to have a sustained agricultural sector. Ideological and political objectives, which are not subordinate to the economic realities, have no place in a master policy plan, any plan. When transformation is put above sustainability, profitability, or effectiveness, it leads to the state which we now find the SAA, Eskom, PRASA, Transnet, and the NEL, and all the other institutions. It's not a problem that we do not think we have to empower people, but you can do it if you do have something to do it with. It's that cake that you have to build and grow and grow and grow. And I agree with that point very strongly. We have to grow our economy. Our unemployment is rising every year under this present policy. The biggest problem for South Africa at this stage is our policy. And therefore, if you as a political party want to compile an agricultural policy, it should be sound and clear and stick to the right economic principles. Our farmers cannot afford it that we have this type of transformation into failure and dysfunctionality. And our consumers and our country cannot afford it. And that is for us a great concern, the way forward, that at this stage, the present policy is not making a contribution for the benefit of nobody. The government themselves admit that 95% of the land they transfer go out of production. That is not the way it should be done. And ourselves as an organization, as well as a lot of other organizations, make very positive inputs. Way back in 2005, we make a positive input how we can help new entry farmers to have success if they have the passion, the acceptance of responsibility, and all those issues. But government every time choose the ideological side instead of the economical side. And that is when we talk about agriculture. This is an economic process and we have to stick to those principles. We compile a document, it's about, I think, 34 pages. I was not now in a position to print it out because everything is dark around me. But as soon as I do have power, then I will send it through to you. And there's a lot of issues within this document that you can take notice of, and you can make a decision if you can use some of it or not, because we try to stick to those principles that have a successful, sustainable agricultural sector. And the last word from my side, we have to make sure that we keep our agricultural sector alive, because then we can have a country that will also be alive. that is the most important issue in a country is food on the table. Take that away and the anarchy will be of such a nature that no one will actually manage that. So for us to keep our agricultural sector alive, and it does not go about who is the farmer, if it's a man or woman, black or white, that's not the issue. What South Africa needs is successful farmers, but we should give the new entry farmers a fair chance for success if they stick to the rules. And that is what we try to strive to. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Benny. Very poignant indeed. Thank you so much. I'm now looking for Afrika Msimang. I saw you online. Is it NAN Engineering or is it IX Engineering? You're the chairperson of that organization. Is Afrika online? Mr. Msimang, I saw you online. Can you hear me? All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip Mr. Msimang, and hopefully, if you can nudge by raising your hand to indicate that you are indeed available to give your remarks, I will definitely give you the time to do so, because I think that you have valuable input to make with regards to perhaps technology in the sector, and so we're looking forward to your contribution. With that said, I will give it now to Athol Trollip, who is also a farmer, even though he is the chairperson in the Eastern Cape for ActionSA. But I think at heart, Mhlekazi, you are definitely a farmer. I'm an aspiring farmer, aspirant farmer, and I see that the interest in this conversation is very much apt. It is there. I'm seeing lots of questions coming through online, and so that will give us some time to go through that. But let me give you the floor, Athol, to take it away. Your 10 minutes start now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lerato, and thank you for all the people that are participating. Let me just start by saying that I'm really encouraged by the introductory comments of our President Mashaba, who displays an understanding of agriculture, even though he says he knows nothing about farming. Agriculture and farming are a business like any other business, and you need to understand business. So thank you very much for those comments. Colleagues, I also am sitting here and I'm astounded to hear the commentary overlap by all the presenters. Yet when one engages government, they come across as being so clueless. And all I can say is they're none so deaf or blind as those that don't want to hear or see. So I've got some comments. I'm going to go through them very quickly because I think we need to give attention to the questions. First of all, the rural areas of South Africa, or, the platteland of the old segregated South Africa and the former TBVC states or homelands, are home to an enormous and significant population, most of which support the governing party, which is the ANC, currently and historically since 1994. This is an important aspect that we need to bear in mind, especially when one talks about the poverty of these areas. The population in these areas is reeling from poverty and unemployment. Rural towns have become ghost towns or remittance receipt and grant payday consumption centers with no self-sustainability or economic activity. And as one of the presenters said, Herman, said they're the consequence of the emergence of mega farms and mega farmers, where family and social contributions from individual farmers seems to fall away and ends up in platteland decay. This has also led to a record and an unprecedented rate of urbanization by job seekers fleeing the grinding poverty of the rural hinterland, and they leave behind dislocated, desperately poor families, and the cities and coastal towns have become transit camps for desperate job seekers who live in unimaginable social and socio-economic squalor with little to no formal service delivery and job opportunities. These areas have become twilight zones of miserable human existence on the periphery of these urban centers. And I caution all of us that these are the hotbeds of revolution, where the immunity from accountability of incendiary utterances like the 10th anniversary of the EFF is a recipe for disaster if we don't deal with the the cause of these symptoms that I've just discussed or described. In most of the rural provinces, like the Eastern Cape in particular, where I come from, agriculture and tourism and ecotourism hold the greatest job potential and for economic growth, yet both of these sectors are floundering and ignored by the current government. I'm going to mention tourism because I believe tourism, ecotourism, and agriculture go in hand. Our tourism is floundering because of an incoherent foreign policy and service delivery challenges faced in the industry, travel and visa restrictions, sporadic airline access and serviceability for tourists. Safety and security is always a concern for any kind of tourism industry, and our road infrastructure to tourism sites and attractions is just really appalling. So the same applies to agriculture, and agriculture, as we all know, is divided into two sectors really. One is the commercial sector and one is a communal developing agricultural sector. So let me talk about some of the challenges in the commercial sector. The commercial sector is pretty much the government adopts an you're on your own attitude. And Henri was just referring to somebody calling the private sector in agriculture the enemy. And it's just amazing that the government can call it the enemy when it's one of the most successful sectors with absolutely no or little government support. You know, our export sectors are open to the vagaries of punitive trade barriers and arbitrary anti-competitive behavior by competing states and other nationalities. And our government does absolutely nothing about that. An example is the precarious and vulnerable situation with AGOA due to South Africa's mad foreign policies and our aligned position on Russia and membership of BRICS. And then, you know, if you look at our greatest export agricultural products, perishable products, fruit, various fruits, citrus, pome, and other deciduous fruits. Our main export markets are demanding reduced export temperatures, which has a massive infrastructure cost to the agricultural industry and the export industry. Stricter and stricter phytosanitary compliance requirements, which are not really necessary for fruit FCM, fruit fly, black spot, for example. The global gap compliance requirements are becoming more and more stringent every single year. Costs of inputs such as fuel and fertilizer are unregulated and there's no state support, despite the sector assuring national and domestic food security and earning incredibly important foreign currency on the export market. The lack of water and energy security that various people have referred to, and even the erosion of these rights is a serious concern. And then also having to provide your own energy at your own cost for the agricultural industry is having a really bad influence on the bottom line of agriculture and forcing people out of agriculture. Then lack of security of tenure or threats of expropriation without compensation is a major dampener on capital investment by South African farmers and potential foreign investors. There's almost no reliable and export state extension services left. The collapse of state institutions such as Onderstepoort that produced important animal vaccines and animal health products, and the collapse of our agricultural colleges has been disastrous. Also, plant and crop specialist institutions like the ARC are broken. For all intents and purposes, they're broken. And most of this research is being done in the private sector. For example, in the citrus industry, you've got the CRI in collaboration with the Citrus Growers Association. And colleagues, if you think the state of our universities, and latterly we've seen that UNISA has been placed under administration, is chaotic, our agricultural colleges are completely powerless when it comes to the state of them. I thought it was really important that one of the presenters was speaking about how important it is to have innovation and technology in agriculture, because you can't compete internationally without a proper IT for the sector. Then I want to talk about the emerging sector in the agricultural sector. You know, we've got provincial departments, and the one in the Eastern Cape where I come from is called the Department of Rural Development and Agrarian Reform. And I can tell you there's nothing more, this is nothing more than a misnomer, because there is no effective, efficient, sustainable rural development or agrarian reform happening in this province. In fact, the agrarian activity in the former TBVC states is a far cry from when it was at the turn of the 20th century, not the 21st century, at the turn of the 20th century, where agricultural production in those areas was much higher than it is today. And certainly it was much higher during the apartheid era and the homeland governments. Almost all of the former parastatals that provided job opportunities and promoted agricultural production are gone. And the infrastructure that was linked to that is now derelict or destroyed. And the current government's policy on small-scale project-driven agricultural development has proven to be disastrous due to the following issues. I'm going to highlight a few of them. Due to the lack of ownership of security, of tenure, due to accountability demands and consequence-driven performance of beneficiaries, lack of support services and extension services, as I've said, a lack of commitment by beneficiaries and the state to make these projects work, a really deficient policy suite that does not support agricultural production and economic improvement. There's a lack of resource conservation, and we've seen that erosion and invasive plant encroachment is a real problem under the current dispensation. Safety and security issues and the woeful behavior and performance of South African police services in rural areas is a major concern. The lack of policing and when it comes to stock theft and crops theft is driving people out of agriculture, especially on border areas. We've heard some of our colleagues making contributions from the Eastern Transvaal and speaking about the impact of stock theft there and crop theft as well. And then, colleagues, we have the Spatial Planning Land Use Management Act. It's called SPLUMA, the acronym. Yet despite that, we've seen incredible residential development sprawl in agricultural areas in the former TBVC areas, where this act is simply not applied. And this is a major concern for future agricultural production in some of the areas that have some high potential for agricultural production. Road infrastructure we've seen is completely devastated. Maintenance is almost non-existent on many of the unsurfaced roads in all 9 provinces. Also, the local markets for produce that has been produced by emerging and communal farmers is almost non-existent, other than, street side hawking, which makes proper production very vulnerable if you can't get rid of all of your product quickly and efficiently. Then, colleagues, biosecurity and animal health control is a major concern. There's no application of the notifiable disease and control and management legislation. It affects animal meat production and fiber production. Also, the collapse of the land bank has been completely devastating. This requires, all of this that I've just said very quickly, requires a return to basics and prioritization of this sector. And when I listen to the presenters, it's all about doing the basics right. If we just get the basics right, we can produce. We've shown that all over the world that we can outproduce many developed countries. But if we just get the basics right, we really can make the sector grow and thrive. I believe that the sector goes hand in hand with tourism. So as you fix the agricultural sector challenges, the tourism-related challenges get fixed at the same time. There's a symbiotic relationship between these two sectors as they coexist in the same areas. We also require the state to release land to people who have a genuine passion and desire to farm. Land allotments must be of a sustainable size and must come with tenure security, or else they will become dead capital or moribund land. Land reform has been fraught with corruption, with land transaction taking place at grossly inflated prices, and then the land being left fallow and not being farmed optimally. And it militates against meaningful land reform. We must accept also that many restitution beneficiaries do not want to farm and accept financial compensation rather than being compensated with land. And we must understand that this is a once-off transaction, and they can't come back or claim more land or claim that they are landless if they have chosen financial compensation. This is a very simple choice. We live in a constitutional democracy where people make choices. And once you've made that choice, you must accept that the choice has been made, and the government must be completely unambiguous about that. And then in conclusion, I believe that, and we believe as ActionSA, that the civil service must employ people with relevant academic and technical expertise in agriculture. Otherwise, the partnership cannot be meaningful, and we will not address many of the issues that have been raised today. And then communal ownership will never amount to optimal use of the land and productivity of the land. And this has been proven the world over. And then lastly, just to illustrate that if our infrastructure that is the backbone of effective agricultural production and competitive agricultural production can be fixed, things will work much better. Just to illustrate that of the 351 ports in the world that were recently evaluated by the World Bank, our 3 biggest ports perform last on productivity. The Port of Durban, which is our biggest port, came number 351. The Port of Mocha, which is our newest port, came out at position number 350, and the Cape Town port, number 349. Now, colleagues, if our major export terminals are the worst performing in the world when it comes to productivity, our products are not going to reach the markets in the open markets across the world, and that compromises perishable products. And if perishable products are compromised, we can't compete with the fruit that's on the shelves in other countries. So all the endeavors of those farmers are rendered null if we have the kind of productivity that we've seen at our ports. And then lastly, road and rail infrastructure. We can't compete internationally if we can't get our products to the market. And if we can't get them to the port, and the port allows them to go rotten on the port side or quay side, then we really are fighting a losing battle. So I believe that ActionSA needs to address those basic issues. And if we can do that and allow the individuals and the private family operations, farming operations that Dirk was speaking about to perform what they do best, then South Africa can be competitive and we can create jobs in the agricultural sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Athol. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's lots of food for thought. Colleagues, I just want to check, is there anyone that I have left out? I'm not trying to do that because there's a plethora of questions that are coming through. I think we have made good time, and that's really, really productive and very good. Can I just see by a show of hand if there's anyone who would like to make an input that I have not allowed to do so? I know that Ms. Afrika Msimang has been having technological challenges by way of connectivity. Can you hear me? Are you able to come online? All right, Afrika has been having a lot of challenges. If at any point she's able to come on, I think we will allow her the time to do so. It is 11:39. We do have just under an hour to go through for questions. There are a lot of questions that I've received online. I am ready to ask those. But if I can just see going once, if there's anyone else who would like to make a brief and short input while we're here, it is the People's Dialogue after all. I see some members who are online. If there's anyone who would like to speak, please take your chance now by raising your hand. Going once, twice, gone. Okay, so we will talk to land reform toward the end, because I think sometimes land reform is an elephant in the room, just given the discourse that has happened in the last couple of years. But we're very glad that a lot of you have raised or even hinted at the issue of land reform and how we could possibly go about it. The president did mention the fact that Section 25 of the Constitution already makes provision, but I think that there is a huge misnomer. There are a lot of publications that have come through. There's a book titled Land in South Africa that kind of tries to grapple with this issue and as to how we can go about it. And so I'm going to leave that almost toward the end, but I will afford it as much time as is possible. There are questions online, and I'm wanting to thank the people who are online for posing their questions. These are really, really valuable inputs, and we're very grateful for your participation. One question I will ask is from the The person is MKLD. I'm not sure, who I can say that is, but MKLD, you know yourself, is talking about a strategy for communal farmers. And I'll give that to anyone. And I'm thinking, Dirk, you could possibly take this one. Is there, in fact, a strategy for communal farmers? And what does that look like? What does that mean? And if there is an absence of such a strategy, what should it look like in short? So I think I'm going to give that one to Dirk or anyone else who is prepared to take it. The next question says, South African farmers, or maybe a comment, South African farmers have a lot to offer and teach the rest of the world. Our soil is unique and influences agricultural environment is much different. Is that statement actually true? Is our soil unique? What makes us have the ability to afford, particularly on the African continent, 72% of food production, whereas the rest of the continent is not able to do so, given how small we are in relation to other countries on the continent. Anyone can take a stab at that one. And the next person asked, and thank you so much, Mbuso, for always being part of our conversations. Mbuso asks, if we have metro police across the country for different areas of the country, why do we not have, or is there any plausibility in the formation of rural police? Because crime is crime, but the metros and the rural farm areas are not the same. So should we, in fact, entertain the idea of having a rural police? Anyone can take this particular question. I won't pose it to anyone. If you are ready to answer any one of these questions, please do raise your hand and take a stab at it. Remember that all of you are absolutely welcome to answer any one of these questions. Julio is also online. Thank you, Julio, and asks, we need to have a tax-free African trade system. Can somebody answer, what would that actually look like? The tax-free African trade system. What would that trade system entail, and what would it look like? And then I'm going to ask the last question in this round. And I think, Dirk, you mentioned this one, particularly on the border of the Congo. And this one asks, with porous borders, I'm so sorry, the timer is going forth, and I think this time is stopping me, to say, with porous borders and corruption by our customs, how does this is for Croplife. Okay, Croplife, Croplife, Elriza, you can take this one. I think it's mentioning this to you. How does Croplife control the influx of agricultural pesticides, which can be harmful to our soil and air? And so this one can be quite a complex question, and I think anyone can take it in terms of the illicit trade that sometimes happens. And I don't know whether this illicit trade is sort of located or sort of siloed towards particular products. Do we have illicit agricultural product trade that is coming through our borders in nefarious ways? And so I will take, let me allow the first answer to go through, and then I will ask the next round of questions as we move on. Dirk, are you ready with your response?
Yes, I apologize for the background noise. They're cutting up the palm tree that has fallen over. I hope it's not bothering too much. Firstly, the question, if I can,
thank you. It's
the
fine.
question, if I can recap, is there indeed a strategy for communal farming? Of course there is. And I think everybody around this table can make a contribution, but there's a couple of pillars that you have to put in the ground. So it's the same with communal farming as with as with any other farm, you have to commercialize it. So if you have a plan to get communal farming going, and we've got a number of projects in South Africa doing just that, the first thing that you must realize, and I'm putting me in the shoes of the communal farmer, you need to go and stand at the marketplace first and look down that value chain of that pipe back to where you are going to have the primary production. You have to farm against an offtake of you're going to sell your product somewhere, so to be able to afford the inputs of the following season. So in communal farming, you have to do proper planning, project planning, and if you don't have the skills, you have to attach yourself to a mentorship of some, and there's a lot of this available. There's a lot of, from the government side, unfortunately, a lot of failures here, and it's because I think the standard of support of the advisory support that coming from DALRIT, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, they struggle with this. And in our case, the mentorship from a commercial farmer or farmers will help. The fact that most of the communal farming projects that we try to start functions just by means of the initial startup money, and when it's done, normally those farmers return to a poor state of farming, where the quality of what they produce, the volume, in other words, as well, the volume and the quantity, simply will not sell at any market. So the principle is you have to do it in a scientific manner, and you must realize it's a business. You have to equip yourself with knowledge, the way you do your bookkeeping, the experts you use, the way you run your equipment, maintain it, replace it. It's a whole system of farming. And maybe the last point is that, and this is really a poor state of affairs, which we have to put right with in terms of attitudes and mindsets. In South Africa, communal farming, they tend to make decisions on a farm in a committee system. There have to be accountability and responsibility, very clearly spelled out with very clear deliverables of people participating, a very strict control about the assets that you have, as well as the flow of capital. And the other one is very important, that you must realize a farmer gets successful from the sweat of your eyebrow. You will get successful by sitting back, to be absent from the farm when you need to irrigate, to sow, to use fertilizer, or to pick your crop and to harvest, will make it a failure in the end. But surely there's a place for communal farming if you commercialize it, and very clear and effective strategies.
Derek, we lost Dirk, we lost you there for the last bit of your comment. I'm not sure if Johan, are you happy with what you've received from Dirk? I'm not too sure, but I definitely lost Dirk.
Yes, no, it was clear on my side, so I think it's just on the issue on your side.
All right, Dirk, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I see, Athol, you have a response. Your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lerato. I just want to make a couple of comments. I want to respond to the second, third, and last question. So, what makes South Africans farmers unique? Well, I once had a visit from somebody in Australia where I'd worked previously as a young farmer, and the Australian farmer said to me that the Karoo is probably the most overcapitalized desert in the world, but it is the most productive desert in the world. So what he was saying is that land like the Karoo in Australia, you can't farm there on a 2,000 hectare farm, which is the sort of average size of farms in the Karoo. In the central parts of Australia, people farm on extensive pieces of land, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 hectares. So South African farmers have proven that they can be productive on relatively small pieces of land that are not even highly suited to agricultural production. That's the first thing. Secondly, these South African farmers are sought after all over the world. And Dirk from SAI knows that well. Many countries in Africa and other parts of the world seek out South African farmers. I heard a stat recently that there are more South Africans working in the agricultural sector in the United States than there are Mexicans, which to me is a huge concern. And then You know, often the government is seeking solutions for our agricultural production challenges everywhere else but under their nose, where there are already South African farmers. And just to illustrate what Dirk was saying, they say that the best manager on a farm is the owner's shadow. So if you are on your farm and you are there every day, and being a proper manager and having your shadow cast over your farm, the farm will be productive. You can't farm at an arm's length or from the comfort of your office. Then when it comes to metro police and rural police, we believe that you know, the closing down of the commando system had devastating consequences to rural safety, and that can be revitalized. And also the dysfunctionality of the South African police reservists is a major concern to us. And what is happening in the agricultural sector is that people are now using private security companies to protect their livestock and their crops. And this is a massive impact on the bottom line as well, because this is a before tax expense. And we believe that the government should be incentivizing rural communities who employ private security companies to control crime, rather than punishing them by making them pay tax and then not providing South African police security services, and then they having to then get private security. And then last question about porous borders and management. I'm not so concerned about pesticides and prohibited products coming across our borders. I'm much more concerned about the non-control of pests and biosecurity challenges that we are faced with as an agricultural economy because of the free flow of animals and pests, especially in the illicit trade of animals coming across our borders and causing complete havoc. I mean, foot and mouth disease, for example, avian flu, and many of those other challenges that have devastating economic consequences are a result of having porous and unprotected borders. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Athol. Thanks very much. I'm just scanning through for questions here. Dirk mentioned something about opportunities available in the sort of CSI space. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? I mean, you did speak about education as a value chain in that space, but how does that become, to Jan's point, where Jan's opening remarks really was just about we need to grow the economy, we need to grow the economy. And that's very well and good. But how do you do that, unearthing the capacity that you spoke about with regards to the sort of the CSI, corporate social investment space, when in fact other speakers have spoken about the limiting effects of, say, for example, quotas and BE as intervention in this regard? Dirk?
The question of if there are opportunities, can you just repeat that one part? I lost you, and they say there was opportunities in CSI and CSR money.
Exactly. So yeah. You were speaking about, in relation to unearthing, unearthing the sort of opportunities available, and you mentioned CSI as an opportunity. Yes. And so, yeah, can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
I'm going to do it by means of examples. There are if you take the economies of any country or a region or our continent, for that, is based basically on two primary production areas. One is agriculture and the one is mining. Now, normally in South Africa, if you look at the examples we've had here, those two are normally at loggerheads with one another. I mean, if you take Mpumalanga and parts of Gauteng and Limpopo and so on, well, it goes where coal mines have mushroomed over a big period of time. They actually destroy the topsoil, and it's very difficult to repair it. But in the rehabilitation, when mines are getting defunct and they're not, their shelf life is over, all those mine workers have to be catered for. Nowadays, in mining licenses and so on, you need to put that plan into place, which makes agriculture very relevant and people must be much more aware of how they deal with the environment. That's one. And new mining licenses, for instance, that's being issued in Zambia and the DRC and places like that. You cannot get the mining license if you do not have a foolproof CSR, a food security plan that will enhance the food security of the area that the mine is going to be operating. And there's big budgets for it, up to 10-15% of the total mine budget that is set aside for that. And it actually helps, because in that way, where you farm commercially, the infrastructure that's created by the mines in terms of energy, water, reticulation, roads, rail, airports, inland ports, marketplaces, and so on. You work actually hand in hand, which means joint planning in this regard also make the infrastructural burden on farmers for roads and maintenance and so on, and to create an environment where they actually can enhance and accelerate the commercialization of their farm and getting that profit line and pick up their heads and their business plans much faster. So I think it's extremely important, and we must take cognizance of that. I also want to mention the so-called corridor approaches. Corridors in Africa is the way that economic development is being planned as a strategy, where gas, oil, telecommunication, water, and everything goes through that corridors. And to do that, to protect it, to have hands and ears and on the ground to check what's happening there. With that, you have to give the population something around these corridors. So all these companies running these corridor and infrastructure put vast sums of money to make sure that the local population and the communal farming opportunities with that commercial farming as well is exploited. It keeps the infrastructure safe, and it also provides food security to the job opportunities that's created in that. And that is already embedded in the funding plans of these big corporations that work with that. Maybe just a final point from my side here is that when we do things like that, we must also be careful of certain policies that's very restrictive in this. We need, by means of putting policy together, actually help to promote cooperation between the mining sector, the energy sector, the water reticulation sector with agriculture, and not fight one another. I think Athol has mentioned there in his background also, it is very easy when you start up a commercial farm. Australia is a very good example of that. And all our irrigation has been done from rivers and so on. You're always at loggerheads because town development and so on use the same. So it might be a drawback as well. So the solution lies in proper education of yourself. Where do you start looking for these commercial opportunities? But secondly, sit down around a table and do your strategic planning jointly, instead of doing it in a haphazard sort of way as you've progressed far further down the line. Thanks.
Thank you, Dirk. Is there anyone else who wants to take a stab at any of the questions before I move on to the second round? I do have a Gert from New to add on before I see if I can get a response from Gert. Okay. No response from Gert. Athol, please go ahead.
Yeah, Lerato, thanks very much. I just don't want the one question to go by unresponded to, the question around tax-free zones or tax-free Africa trade system. Look, I think it's something that we as a party must very definitely look at. If it's not tax-free, I think we should be looking at tax incentives for trade with other African countries, as has been said earlier, that there's a massive market out there in Africa. And if there are some tax incentives with streamlining of our border control, as was said earlier, I think we can really do very well and start supplying agricultural food and agricultural products into Africa. So I would like, if there is anyone on the panel, to make some suggestions, because I think it's an important policy formulation area where we can promote trade in Africa, because obviously the costs for the countries that would be consuming the products that we produce could be a massive benefit to them, especially if there's some trade agreements that we sign up that are Did you get that, Lerato?
I think we lost you there, Athol, just for a second. I was wondering if it was on my side.
I was just saying that if there's somebody on the panel who can give us some advice or input around policy formulation on tax incentivization of intra-Africa trade, because the beneficiaries would be the countries in Africa that trade with us, because obviously transportation costs would be minimal as opposed to importing from other parts of the world. So I think we as a party very definitely need to come up with a policy proposal on trade incentives or tax incentives.
Yeah, maybe sorry.
Henri, can I hand that on to you? Oh, sorry, we preempted each other here.
Yeah, maybe I
can. Some input you can offer there.
Yeah. I think I used to work with Department of Trade and Industry when we phased out the old tax incentive schemes for exports. The General Export Incentive Scheme. So tax incentives for exports is actually not allowed under the World Trade Organization, direct incentives. But there are other ways through DTI or DTI and Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, where they enable people to participate in international trade fairs. You can go and do some primary market research. They subsidize that kind of thing, and also the trade fairs are a big benefit, either in a group or individually. So there are things that can be done, and also there are many of the trade fairs used to be in Africa as well, or not all of them, but some of them, and that also provides an opportunity. But I think under the African Free Trade Agreement, after that's being based in Accra in Ghana, now the head office, it's actually being led by a South African policy specialist. But there are many opportunities, and I think you have to be careful how do you ask for tax incentives in terms of, as I said, because it's not allowed under the WTO, World Trade Organization rules. But I think what can be done is if government get the facilitation arrangements, create this policy environment which private sector can prosper, can go ahead. I think Athol Trollip mentioned about honest report, and one of our other colleagues, sorry, I forgot your name now for a second. That there was Jan Greyling. That the problem is, we need to get the regulatory environment in place, and that is what government should do. They should get honest report ready so that they can verify exports. It's a huge issue at the moment. That for instance, for the red meat industry, they need to certify that it aligns to the EU policies and importation requirements. So I think if government is just doing what they can do best, and that's get the regulatory environment in place, I mean, that will help us a lot. But yes, obviously, Athol also mentioned about the biosecurity of, all the kinds of, what you call it, mouth and food disease that is coming across the border from Mozambique and even other places because of the problematic porous borders that we have, even possibly in the Free State across the border from Lesotho. Sorry, but I think if government can stick to the things that they're supposed to do, and obviously private sectors has been helping. International donor organizations have been helping, especially the EU and others, to get these things in place. Because if that is in place, it will be easier to export. The same with, and I think also Jan mentioned the fact of the Cape Town Harbour, where the facilities are just not in place. And I think if government can see the private sector as a partner, they may allow them to play a more important role in running some of these infrastructure facilities that facilitates trade. Yeah, so I don't know if I'm answering the answer, providing the right answer, but Africa definitely, sub-Saharan Africa, huge opportunity. I just want to, Athol, what is quite interesting is that sometimes it's cheaper to transport something from China to Africa, an African country, than to import it from the country next door to you. I know that is an example that's been told in North Africa by somebody that I knew. I think he was actually from Niger, where we have it was cheaper to import something from China than to import it from the country next door.
Yeah.
So,
Henri, I wanted to agree with you on that.
So, can we? Sorry, colleagues. Instead of having a colloquial conversation around it, why is that? Because that's definitely an anomaly, and I think undermines the idea of intra-African trade that we've been talking about. What actually should be the intervention? I mean, so Jan, I'm going to give you a stab at that, and I have additional questions for you. 12:30 is approaching, and we still have a lot to chew on. May I just ask that we be poignant and pointed in our responses? But yeah, let me give you a stab at that. I mean, what Henri has just mentioned is problematic. What contributes to that, and what should be done about it?
Well, an example that I often use is that if you want to buy maize in Cape Town, it's less expensive to import it via ship from South America than it is to transport it by truck from the north. So if we could have had our rail infrastructure in place, it would have been a different equation. So with respect to trade, it comes back to infrastructure. So if we can't even trade within South Africa, if we take the provinces as a market, how can we export efficiently to the rest of the continent? So our supermarkets are doing it. Shoprite, for example, is exporting fresh produce throughout the continent, but they even given how bad the border posts are being managed, they would go through Botswana, seeing that they could get quicker northwards than through other border posts, which might be much shorter. So infrastructure is key. I can't stress the importance of infrastructure, and with food security, we import all of our wheat. Not all of it, 50% of our wheat. We import all of our rice, so just being able to move product within our country or within our neighbors is paramount.
That's helpful. Thank you very much for that input. I don't know if Henri, you had something else to add, but in terms of, there are other questions that are online, and Jan, these were definitely for you, which speak to the idea of, you spoke about housing for farm workers. You spoke about farming for farm workers, and you said there has to be a strategy to deal with these. Some of us have had experiences. For example, I did visit a family in Howick who had been on this farm for eons. And is it a big portion to lose from for a farm owner who's had farm workers live there over 30, 40 years, intergenerationally? Is it too much to lose to apportion a portion of that land to the farm worker who has been loyal and been there? What should be the strategy in terms of dealing with farm workers? Because if all of us who are South Africans understand migrant work, We know that people have invested in different parts of the country for different reasons. How should we be dealing with farm workers, who possibly have built their entire lives on farms? Is it too much to accede if there were such a possibility? What should policy look like? Because a lot of these communities are literally without access to justice. They are the forgotten peoples of our country, and a lot of us don't get to necessarily think about them. How should we respond to the crisis of farm workers requiring access to space?
Yeah, so it's obviously not an easy question, but an important one. So at the moment, I'm no expert, but ESTA and so forth. So there are various laws trying to address this. I believe, in principle, one should agree with the principle behind them. So you cannot have a situation where somebody would spend their life working on a farm, and then once the employment contract comes to an end, then they have to move. But at the same time, you can't have your farm become a little city where additional people move in, and you have to deliver services and all of that. So the solution that I've come up with, and I'm happy to hear what other people also think, is that there has to be a way in which one can contribute towards a scheme that enables farm workers, once they're retired, to buy a house in town. And I can see how the government can actually support that. And if you talk to people, they don't necessarily want to live on the farm anymore, but they've got no alternatives. So that's my suggestion. I don't know what the alternatives are, but morally, it's wrong to say, okay, you're retired and now you have to fend for yourself. So you need to find solutions, but you can't have a situation where you've got various people living on a farm who do not work there. It's just, yeah.
It is a troubling subject, Jan, because it is pervasive, it is there, and a responsible government would have to respond to some of these things. It is similar to people having lived in Soweto or Alexandra, who've lived there for eons, and still have no, title deed. How do they have collateral with regards to bettering their own lives? It's a question all of us, I think, as South Africans, particularly as political parties who are wanting to gain access to political power. It's something we do have to respond to. And some of these questions are difficult. They are emotive, but we do have to address them, and we do have to confront them. Otherwise, it really does leave a gaping hole for communities who are really in need of restitution and justice. And so,
Can I add one more point? So I know of various farming operations that actually enable their workers to buy a house in town, and that they can rent out whilst they're working on the farm. And then when they retire, they both an asset and an asset that they've earned income from. So there are solutions, but yeah.
Yeah, so let me ask my colleagues to capture that. Johan, if we can capture that in terms of strategies, because we can't just leave people fallow. The reality is that a lot of people, a lot of communities, particularly indigenous communities, do not understand or know how to work with money. So they don't know what opportunities lie ahead for them, and they don't know whether there are actually opportunities for them to relieve themselves of this devastation of not actually having access to a home, for example. And so a lot of farm workers have made the farms their homes. And so as they reach the end of their lives, a lot of them realize that actually they're leaving nothing behind for their future generations. And this is what precipitates a question like this one. And it's coming from somebody who's asked to be anonymous, who has access to our phone lines. And so I'm asking the question for that reason. Athol, I saw your hand was up. I'm not sure if you're responding to the same question or whether I can move on to the next question. It is 12:15. I just want to make colleagues aware. There's still a bit more to chew on. Thanks, Athol.
Yeah, look, I did want to respond. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, we do have legislation in this country, the Extension of Security of Tenure Act, which takes care of people who've been working on a farm most of their lives, who have been working there for more than 10 years, and those that reach retirement age. There has been an unintended consequence of the impact of ESTA, where farm workers have been encouraged to move to the farms. And what has happened there is there's been a breakdown of that kind of family environment on a farm, where the farmer and his family take care of farm workers and their families with pregnancies and giving birth in the middle of the night, and those kind of support services no longer exist. That has been really unfortunate and unintended consequence of ESTA. But what I do think also is that there are many incentive schemes that are being run through agricultural unions or representative bodies, where farmers and their farm workers are incentivized to put money away on a monthly basis for their retirement day, and whether they are investment schemes or retirement annuities, where the farmer contributes so much and the worker contributes so much. Those kind of investment schemes really need to be encouraged, but they are sometimes meddled with and messed up with the consequences of minimum wage. You know, my own personal experience is that many farmers in this country, and they get no credit for it, provide more than a minimum wage. They provide accommodation, residential accommodation, food, milk, meat, etc., and other groceries to their workers, but that is not taken into account when it comes to determining a minimum wage. So I think what is really responsible is that there should be kind of incentives for farmers to provide support and social services to their workers, and also investment schemes that take care of them when they're no longer working. I know there's a massive problem with extended families of former farm workers that are no longer working on the farm. It's a phenomenon all over the world. Even farmers' children don't want to farm, and farm workers' children, most certainly many of them don't want to farm, but they want to live on the farm, and the family gets bigger and bigger and occupies more and more space. And that becomes a challenge. So I think there should be some focus on incentivizing farmers and their farm workers to take better care of their golden years, and to incentivize investment schemes, and to give some kind of tax concession for that. Thanks, Lerato.
Thanks, Athol. While you're on the floor, a second elevator pitch. Somebody's asking on our social media platform, if Athol Trollip were the Minister of Land and Agriculture, what would be his main focus to address the land issue, transform the sector, and attract investment into the sector? If I can ask you that question, 1 second, maybe a minute elevator pitch before I move on. We do actually have 15 minutes left.
It's a massive question, but first of all, I would eradicate the uncertainty around security of tenure and deal unambiguously with Section 25, where there's thoughts of expropriation without compensation. If there's a sword of Damocles hanging over the head of agriculture, that's it. And if you are going to be expropriated without compensation, it prevents investment by the active farmer, and it also prevents investment by foreign countries who want to invest in agricultural production. So that would be the very first thing that I would do.
Great, fantastic, Mbuso. I hope you are satisfied. Thank you, Athol. I'm going to leave the last question to Elriza regarding the women's involvement in agriculture and in the space, what an enabling environment looks like for women in the space. I'm going to leave that one to the last question, but I do have Dr. Buhlali Tema, who've asked a question in our social media platform saying, I haven't heard a single mention of young or small-scale farmers and traditional farmers. Agriculture is practiced in most communities and they should all be catered for. Small-scale Black vegetable farmers are young and are extremely enthusiastic about farming, and they use farming to make a living. They need encouragement and support. We need databases of these young people in our different provinces. We need to take our traditional farmers and introduce them to modern technologies and training to rural farmers to improve their farming. Now, there's an added question to this one, which came from Anonymous, who has said, what has made Afrikaner farmers so successful in South Africa? So what are the ingredients? And I think it was Johan Dreyer who said there are rules in this game. What are the rules, and what has made it so successful for a particular cohort of people in our society that has not made it for others? And I think Dr. Busladi's question can be responded to in the same way. I'm not sure who wants to take the question, but anyone is open to the floor. Who do I see on the floor? I see Elriza, you're gonna come last, but I see Johan Dreyer still there, and I see Dirk. Does anyone want to take a stab at this question?
Lerato, I see Dirk's put up his hand, and I'd like to give it a bash. I'd like to give it a bash after Dirk.
All right, go ahead, Dirk.
Thanks, Lerato. It's the question of why they're so successful. Of Afrikaner farmers.
Look, it dovetails into the question around what support do we give? Yeah. So,
okay,
but what
I would gladly address it, because it's an extremely important one. My involvement on powerful Pan-African Farmers Organization level was exactly that. She's not right. She said we did not mention it. We emphatically mentioned the youth and the importance of the youth, but there's realities we must take into consideration. One, when we say farmers are very successful, we must take the statistics also into mind, and that is 1 out of every 3 farmers that put their hands at agriculture, and that's I think it's very gracious. I think the equation is much worse. Actually make a commercial success. It's not that easy. I was CEO of AgriGauteng while I was in the AgriSA environment, and 70% of the farmers that was on that platform actually were part-time farmers. They could not afford to farm if they did not have another profession. But what makes it important is the structured planning and standard the marketplace in terms of what you're doing. You need to know your soil quality, your water quality, the markets, and everything that goes with that. So the point I'm trying to get at is, one, the realistic. 78% of all farmers in Africa are women, but those women have not been empowered, because they actually the farmers, but in many of the cultural environments they're not allowed to have land. So we need to remove the obstacles, and we also must be able to look each other in the eye and say we need culturally to move on as well. And even in the normal economic workplace, women have become breadwinners as well. We must find a better social compact amongst one another. But the extremely important thing for South Africa is we focus so much on youngsters. There are not so many youngsters left in the deep rural areas in South Africa. A part of the challenge we have is people farming in the urban environment has become extremely important. Smallholder farmers that can do what you find all over in the first world and in other places, that can do in 2 or 3 hectares with intensive farming that other guys can do in 50 hectares. That the solution lies there. But the fact that you get the land is again not going to make you profit. But the main comment I want to make, if you want to be successful and there's a yearning to go into farming, the issue really is not. There's so much land available that's at the moment in the state's hand, that the quest for agriculture just to go and say we take it from commercial farmers is ludicrous. There's really more than enough land, and with water, and in excellent farming areas available. is what do you do when you've caught this bus with that bus? That's going to be the proof of that pudding, and that makes quality eating. But the major issue here, and I say it really with a lot of respect to our political system in this country, is we really lost the basis of talking to each other in a proper fashion. And it's about morals and values. How do we listen to one another, create conditions? I know most of the farmers that I know already making provision for their farm workers. The system that of land occupation, even if you were gathering firewood on a farm, makes you open to a claim that people can come and claim your land. They can say, generations before, my cattle were actually grazing on your farm, and that makes me liable to take your farm. But if we sit down and afford each other a little bit of that sunshine, there is enough for everybody. Farmers are making provision already for farm workers to do their thing. But it's also very important from a commercial point of view. If you start and you don't structure it well, people will work more on their own lands than on the commercial farm. The commercial farmer can't take that risk either. But the solution lies in a very good social compact. And for me, when we go overseas in Africa, it's absolutely on a spiritual level, where we get to know each other's values. And many of the farmers start building churches and community places where they can meet one another on the same level and talk their hearts out. That day when you're just standing there and shout out commands to your farm workers is forever gone. You have to have a very strong, positive relationship. So invest in people's attitudes. And you can only do it if you yourself are a good role model as the farmer. And secondly, show that the moral fiber you made of is something that they value and must treasure.
Thank you very much, Lerato. I did ask if I could just make a comment. First of all, how do we propose to help small emerging farmers? I believe the best way to do that is through producer or commodity representative organizations, like the National Wool Growers Association have helped improve the genetic impact on wool growth in the Eastern Cape tremendously. You've got the CGA working with black citrus growers. You've got the red meat producers organizations, and those are the kind of organizations that are best suited to developing partnerships, not government. Government is just too monolithic. They're not nimble enough, and they have no track record of success. So I spent the last 2 years, or 2 years ago, I was working with black commercial citrus growers, and their production improved dramatically, and not because of government intervention, despite government intervention. Often government intervention is not practical, it's not timeless, and it doesn't empower. It entrenches dependency. And I want to state categorically that when any kind of agricultural organization or producer organization negotiates with government, that those negotiations must be on public record, especially the undertakings. Because very often my experience has been, when I was in organized agriculture in the past, we would negotiate with government, they would make undertakings behind closed doors and not honor them in public. And that's very debilitating. And often farmers are denigrated unnecessarily and unjustifiably so. I agree with Dirk that there have to be relations on any kind of farm, and they must be mutually respectful, but you simply cannot comb all farmers under the same comb and call farmers disrespectful people. They're not. By and large, they work very well with their communities that they live with and work with, but we need to promote that and continually improve relations between farmers and farm workers. And I think that the further the government stays from that, the better.
Thank you, Athol. Johan, if I may, and all of the colleagues, just take 5 more minutes. We are literally, this has been the best conversation and roundtable, I think, yet in terms of timekeeping. I do want to give it back to Elriza to talk about women in agriculture and the experience, and what should the policy environment look like, an enabling environment look like for greater feminine participation, women participation, for that matter, in the space. Elriza, if you can take a stab at that, and then, I'm going to ask Herman Mashaba, the president of ActionSA, to give us closing remarks, before we end this call. If I may ask your indulgence, colleagues, just for a few more minutes. It is 12:30. We had organized to end at 12:30, but this has really has been a robust conversation and has definitely been a very engaged one. And so, Elriza, can you come in on that, and then we'll be done shortly.
Thank you so much, Lerato. I think one of the things we need to remember is how far we've come already. If you just consider less than 100 years ago, we weren't able to vote, and 20 years ago or a couple of decades ago, a woman having a career and raising a family was very uncommon. So I think we just need to remind ourselves that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and applaud the strides that we have already made. And in alignment with that, to keep it firmly on the agenda. I think we need to connect more on farm level, and then another with females, because it doesn't always happen in the boardrooms. We need to connect on farm level because it's a feeling, it's an emotional thing as well. But one of the biggest things I think also needs to happen is to remind and educate people about all the possibilities, work opportunities that are available that is within agriculture that's not necessarily being a farmer, right? So we had this discussion the other day about why are there still so few female CEOs within the agricultural sector, and if we were women discussing this, and basically it boiled down to they didn't really like sales. And unfortunately, that's the basis of, or that's a big part of the CEO position. And it wasn't anything to do with they couldn't cut it or didn't want to make it, they just didn't like sales. And this was obviously a very small sample group. I'm not saying that is how it is in general, but I think if you look at where the female scientists are coming in, they're making great strides. And in academia as well, great strides. So I think we need to keep that in mind and remind people about what opportunities there are that people didn't think of. Agricultural journalism in itself is also a big thing. Science communication is a big thing. So that would be my 2 cents to keep on the agenda for that specifically. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Elriza. Am I saying your name right? Because I'm very pedantic about, saying people's names right. Elriza Theron, correct?
Yes, thanks. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your participation. It is 12:33. Can I call you Dr. Herman Mashaba? I know you have a honorary doctorate. I don't know. I'm told that, you're only doctor in the space that you were given the doctorate, given what we've seen transpire of late with people using those titles. May I allow you, Dr. Herman Mashaba, President of ActionSA, to give us your closing remarks following the robust session that we have had this morning.
No, thank you very much, Lerato, and thank you very much to really all the participants. I think, Lerato, you're most welcome to call me Dr. Mashaba at the institution where I was awarded this honorary doctorate. And I think otherwise, anywhere else, please address me, not even as Mr. Mashaba. You're most welcome to call me Herman or Hyman. In fact, that's when you make me actually quite comfortable. Colleagues, thank you so much really for such a constructive engagement. It's really been quite inspiring for me, really quite inspired by what really happened. I've got 5 closing remarks that I really want to really leave with you, because these are part and parcel of what ActionSA is made out of. Firstly, I think as ActionSA, we are unapologetic. We don't stand on the fence on this 5 issues that I'm going to raise regarding farming and food security. As a party, we are founded on a core value of an unracial society. We committed to this, so that's why anyone really having any discussion with us in terms of how God created us, we believe very strongly that anyone wanting to really live in a racial party would really request that you leave us alone. You are most welcome to go and practice that somewhere else, not in our party. Our party is not just really committed, it's something that we live by. It's something where when we started this party, 2.4 million South Africans said, we want to really see what God created to really be something that we live by. So we are committed to do away with any race-based legislation. For us to really be able to attract more people into the agricultural sector or in the farming sector, we need to invest in agricultural colleges, because farming is one of the most difficult businesses ever. It's not really something that you can do it without getting the proper training, without having the commitment to those. I can really give you an example, colleagues, on the first 2 issues I've raised. You know, I had a white partner in when I conceived the idea of going into the cosmetic industry in 1984, because I did not really have the technical know-how. I was a trader, but I felt the need to really start a manufacturing business. And I invited a white African, Johan from Boksburg, who was a chemist, who knew how to really make this product. Started our business in 1985. And if I look back close to 4 decades, the role that the 2 of us played against government was against the kind of commercial relationship that Johan and I actually developed. And that is why, for me, I really detest anything to do with race, because race is actually something that is promoted by politicians. But if I look at us as ordinary people, that is really something that is not negotiable. And the thing is, now coming out now to a question of the training, you can imagine I had no knowledge about the manufacturing of products, but at the same time I had someone who could really do it. Who had the experience, he had the educational training. He did not just really acquire manufacturing of cosmetics from the street. It's more to do with farming. And my partner Johan, few years down the line in the 90s, when we were successful in our cosmetic business, sold his shares in our business, went into farming, bought a farm somewhere outside Witbank. I can tell you, Johan, within 2 years, lost all his money, because he went into an industry that he had no knowledge of. And that's something that I really want to warn South Africans. It does not matter whether you're black or white. If you don't really have the necessary experience in anything that you want to do, Johan lost all his money with probably the last 15, 20 years of his remaining life. I had to take care of him because he had really lost his money, went into a wrong industry. I believe that we need to incentivize farming, because it's a difficult industry that the environment is so unpredictable. So many factors outside the farmer's control, be the weather and so forth. So I think we need to incentivize our people to go into farming, because we need food security as a nation. We need, fourthly, special safety plans for our farming communities. And I'm not saying so because they're special people. Unfortunately, they've got to already live in rural areas, far away from other activities, so that's why I think in terms of incentivizing them, it's very important. Like also, I can give an example of incentivizing the business community to go in certain areas. I was born and raised in Amanskral, Babelech industrial area. That industrial area during the dark days of our country's history, for that industrial area to thrive, it was because of the business community be given incentive to invest in such areas. And it is the very same thing with farming. We have to incentivize our farmers, otherwise this country will pay a serious price one day when we short of food. Lastly, I think I'd like to address this whole issue of land ownership. I think if we are not going to guarantee land ownership, including my house here in Johannesburg, so if you don't really have security of tenure on your property, there's just no way that you're going to really be able to invest. We cannot expect our farmers because farming, it's a long-term investment. So the security of land tenure is, for me, very important. And fortunate enough, our constitution adopted in 1996, section 25 of this addresses this particular matter. So we don't have to really disrupt our country's economy. We don't have to disrupt our people because we have covered this issue quite sufficiently under section 25 of our constitution. And there's something that I believe as ActionSA, we need to respect the constitution. We don't see any reason whatsoever to really come out with any extra measures to really deal with this matter, so that our farming community can really be assured that we are there, we are aware of historical consideration. However, we need to ensure that our farmers are guaranteed. I had a privilege being the mayor of the city of Johannesburg for 3 years. In the 3 years, managed to expropriate land and properties where we could not really find the owners, and gave them to the private sector. So the expropriation is possible as long as whatever you do it for public good. You're not really doing it because you want to really empower the oligarchs and leaders. You do it for public good. This country's constitution does allow expropriation without compensation as long as it's for public good and you're not there to disrupt the running of our economy. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everyone's contribution to it. And Lerato, thank you so much. You really were a star in really running such a very complex, difficult subject matter. Very necessary for the future of our country. From my side, thank you so much and goodbye.
Thank you, President. Please don't say goodbye yet. You are still here. Thank you so much for those remarks. We really appreciate it. For our process, in terms of Johan and our work, I think there are a couple of takeaways that we have considered in this on this platform, and we're almost done in the next 5 minutes. Is that number one is one of the things that was mentioned by one of our panelists, who says we must invest in people. We have to find a way as to how we do that in the agricultural sector, where we invest in people. And that the next takeaway is that despite all of the goings on in sort of the socio-political domain, people are willing to participate in finding solutions to how we need to undertake land reform and agricultural participation in all the spectra in our country. Dirk mentioned something very important, said we must invest in people's attitudes. How do we shift people's attitudes towards one another to build a winning nation? That was one of the takeaways that was really, really potent in this conversation. We must really deal with how do we police barriers to participation for all sectors of society that have been left out, women being an integral part of that conversation. And so we really need to deal with that one. You know, there's an analogy that speaks to, you know, the 40 acres and a mule, you know, concept in terms of reparation and communal land. How is it, and I think Derek is one who mentioned this around, you know, the 30 acres and a mule spoke about reparations for those who have been underprivileged. But then if you only focus on just affording the 40 acres and a mule, then you're leaving people out and you're reinforcing barriers to access, because you're leaving people out of how they can participate in the commercial spaces of farming and land reform. And yes, you know, it seems like it is an elephant in the room, but actually South Africans are willing to engage in this regard. And then there was a panelist who said something very important, who said, there is enough for everyone. All we need is true political will. You know, there really is enough for everyone. What we need is systematic and true political will, which talks to really creating an enabling environment for South Africa to be a winning nation. And finally, I'm going to just extract from a book written, you know, just I think a year or two ago, called Land in South Africa, Contested Meanings and Nation Formation, published by the Mapungube Foundation and Institute. The excerpt says, the failure to appreciate the linkages between rural and urban realities has culminated in continued inequality, inequity and inequality. If there is no focus on transforming markets and access to property for the majority, and if land reform and property continue to be seen as dichotomous concepts, then the reform of South African land patterns will continue to evade us. And I think that is really a big rallying call for all of us to build a united nation under this particular concept. Thank you so very much to each and every one of you. This has really been a poignant conversation. There is much to chew on. Issues of land and land reform can't be left to places that are lacking imagination. And so we are really, really grateful for your participation. We're really grateful for your insights and inputs. And I think this has been one of our most poignant conversations yet, leading up to our policy conference. It is 12:48, leading to 12:50. Thank you all so very much. My name is Lerato Ngobeni. Your participation is seriously, and I think from ActionSA's point of view, highly appreciated. If my colleague Johan has something else to say, I'm going to give him the floor. But from my standpoint, I think the objectives that we set out for this morning and early afternoon have sincerely been achieved. Thank you so much. Johan, may I allow you to just give us the closing goodbye?
Yes,
thank you very much.
Just to reiterate, thank you very much for your time. And as I said in the chat, if there's more information you'd like to share with us, please feel free to do so at policy@actionsa.org.za. We really appreciate the inputs from external experts. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody, for your afternoon.